Hey, 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 Laura J here with Aakrist today, who I got a chance to meet at Sonic Springs Festival. And I was really blown away by his story and his experience with cultivating breath at a deeper level. So I wanted to bring him to you for those who have not yet had the opportunity to meet such a fantastic man as you. So, how's it going today, Akrist?
Hey, I'm going well. I'm doing going well. It's 8-8 Lionsgate Portal. Yeah, awesome timely time to do this.
I haven't posted anything to the Peaceful Inner Warriors United channel in a while because I've been going through my own shifts. And so I'm excited for this to be a reintroduction to some of those who I've met in the time I've been away to say, hey, I have met characters who have keys to higher levels within the consciousness mountain that we're all climbing. And your peak performance and helping athletes train at higher levels actually stems from your birthplace in Nepal, you had shared.
Yeah, yeah, it does. It's pretty nuts looking back now how it's just perfectly woven together, my path to where I am now and where I want to go as well. So I was born in Nepal. I was born on the day before the seventh month of the year, 1997 at 7:07 a.m. And I moved to Canada when I was 7. So completely displaced from my home country. And I moved to Ottawa, which is super flat, boring, dry, municipal. So total shift in environment, having to learn a new language, make new friends. I didn't fit in anywhere. And growing up, I didn't fit in at school. I didn't fit in at home either because I grew up here. I was always questioning, like I was invited to make meaning of life quite early on and find my footing. So going to a Catholic high school where everyone's doing the cross first thing in the morning, and then I go home, there's Hindu Buddhist tapestries everywhere. There's a lot of confusion. So my dad recommended I go to my very first Vipassana retreat right out of high school, and I did. And there, all you do is you watch your breath. It's breath awareness coming in, going out for at least 3 hours a day, every single day for 10 days in silence. You're not talking to anyone. You're not writing, reading. They feed you, they house you, they teach you the technique, but you're in complete solitude with like 20 other people. So on the eighth day, I left my body. I had an outer body experience, which I'd never done before. And I still have, that's my first and only outer body experience to this day. And I simultaneously become as heavy as a rock and as light as a feather at the same time. And I was like, wow, if my breath can do that for me, what else can it do for me? So going home after that experience, I got my hands on as much as I could regarding breath, books, podcasts, all the things. And the first few years of my practices were Wim Hof and pranayamas. And I felt great. I saw a direct improvement in my sports performance, which I've been playing soccer all my life, basically. I've been an athlete all my life. So I saw a direct correlation with my performance on the field with my practice. And then I began to plateau. About 2, 3 years in, I couldn't improve my game just through the breath, and I saw a big plateau. And I kept getting injured. That was a big theme as an athlete, or and just the culture of being an athlete is work hard until you get better. And really, there's no concept of honor your limits. Maybe you should just slow down and take a rest. So for me, it was the cycle of overwork, injury, overwork, injury. And I remember my first game back from my soccer injury, my knee injury. And, I want to prove to my teammates that I belong on the starting 11, that I belong on the starting team. I want to prove to my coach that he should pick me next game. So I come in at halftime. I'm just flying into every tackle, winning the ball, like charging in, hurrah. My spirit's roaring, but my body's really just trying to catch up. So 90th minute, which is the last minute of the game, and we're down 2 goals. There's no way we're going to come back. But I'm still flying into every tackle. So I fly into this 50-50 challenge. I shoulder check the guy, hand on my bad knee, and I hear a pop. And that's when I knew I wouldn't be playing the rest of the season. So totally devastated. My first game back from the injury. And again, another few months on the sidelines. So really, this was this amazing opportunity for me to dive even deeper with my breath. I didn't see it as that back then. That, laying down and not being able to move, to run, be on the field, dancing with a ball at my feet. I was very limited. And that's when I came across what I teach now, the foundation of what I teach now, which is called the Oxygen Advantage System, which focuses primarily on functional breathing, meaning the breath you're breathing right now, the one you're not thinking about breathing, your unconscious breath, and high altitude training. So functional breathing and high altitude training. And that's when I noticed that, wow, I could actually improve my performance, or rather improve my endurance and accelerate my recovery with a seated practice. I didn't actually have to be on the field running with my teammates to improve my game. I could do it with a seated practice. So when I did go back into the field, I already had a better baseline. I didn't have to do as much catch up. And so now I have the privilege and honor of sharing with athletes and general population, and a lot of yogis as well, how to breathe functionally so that we're sleeping better, we have more resources, more blood flow to the brain, we're recovering better, we're digesting better, all these things, and how we can improve our athletic performance through high altitude training.
That's amazing. And what
And
is
through that, I went through some education with the Czech Institute. I'm a Reiki level 3 practitioner. I'm a WEC method instructor. All like lots of learnings along the way.
yeah. Wow. The technology had paused right in the moment where you had shared what the name of the practice that you teach now is, or the system of it.
Oxygen advantage.
Oxygen advantage.
Mhm.
Okay, so what does that entail, Aakrist?
Oxygen advantage was initially, the foundation of it is actually called the Buteyko method. This is created by a man named Konstantin Buteyko in the World War II era. He was a doctor in the World War II era. So he did a study on his patients. He found that the higher someone's respiratory rate was, the higher their severity of illness. So the faster they were breathing, the sicker they were. So his life's work really became about how can I slow down breathing so that I myself can get healthier and I can help my clients and patients become healthier. So that was around the World War II era. And that uh, transformed now into what we call oxygen advantage, this man named Patrick McCowan's work. And so he took the Buteyko method, which was primarily functional breathing, and he saw that there was a big missing piece, which was there's no one to really contribute this body of work and build on top of it for athletic performance. So he built on top of it, and this is what oxygen advantage is now. So very simply, what it looks like is how can we slow down our unconscious breathing function and then incorporate it into athletics. So what that can look like is holding your breath and sprinting for 50 yards. Holding your breath, walking for many paces, or slowing down your breath while you're moving. And there's a lot of biochemical changes that happen. We can get into the physiology if you'd like. It can get pretty technical, but essentially, we are depriving the body of oxygen and increasing the carbon dioxide in our bloodstream to create these adaptations physiologically so that our body knows how to do more with less.
Wow. And you were saying in a previous conversation that carbon dioxide is actually how the body absorbs oxygen.
Correct, yeah. So CO2 is necessary for oxygen delivery. So I'll make a distinction here between oxygen uptake and oxygen delivery. Those are two different things. Oxygen uptake is everyone inhale from the environment into your lungs, then into your bloodstream. So that's oxygen uptake, which is when you inhale oxygen from the environment, then into your lungs, and then from the lungs, it gets into your bloodstream. So at any given moment, a healthy person has 95 to 99% saturation of oxygen in their bloodstream, default. So that deep breath we're taking is actually doing very little for oxygenating your body more because we're already capped out at 95 to 99%, right? So that's oxygen uptake. Oxygen delivery is a whole different story. Oxygen delivery is when the oxygen in your bloodstream gets into your tissue. So the oxygen in your bloodstream gets into your brain, your muscles, your organs where it's actually needed. Without carbon dioxide present, the oxygen in your blood only stays in your blood, meaning it does not get into your brain, muscles, your organs. And so think of it like this. Say, take your four fingers and wrap them with your other hand. Oxygen from the environment gets into your lungs. In the lungs, something called hemoglobin picks up 4 oxygen molecules. So the 4 fingers right there, that's hemoglobin. And then your fingers around it is, or rather the 4 fingers is oxygen, and your fingers wrapping around it is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin's job is to bind oxygen together so that it can be carried through the bloodstream, right? So with your fingers wrapped around your 4 fingers, now this oxygen can move into your bloodstream. However, the role of hemoglobin is to bind so tightly to oxygen that it won't ever let it go. That's its role. The only thing that signals the release of fingers, the release of oxygen, is carbon dioxide. So for those who are watching the video, you'll get a visual here. You inhale 4 oxygen molecules into the bloodstream, hemoglobin picks it up, carries it into the bloodstream, but it'll only stay in your bloodstream until carbon dioxide comes along, signals the release of oxygen into your cells. Is that clear?
Yeah, that's brilliant. So why is
And so,
everything pop culture wise an attack on carbon if we need it?
yeah, and physiologically, the neural drive to breathe is carbon dioxide. It's not oxygen. We don't breathe to breathe in, we breathe to breathe out. Because if there's too much carbon dioxide in the blood goes acidic, sepsis occurs, which means the waste gets back into your system, your bloodstream, and then disease ensues. So very specifically to avoid that scenario, our brain's primary stimulus to breathe is to watch out for carbon dioxide rising, not for oxygen dropping. And in the same way, there's this narrative where, okay, climate change, carbon, just too much carbon in the environment. So, okay, what if there is? And what if it's just the inability of the earth to absorb that carbon back into the soil, the waters? Because remember, we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out carbon dioxide. Trees breathe in carbon dioxide and give us oxygen. So there's already a symbiotic relationship with Mother Nature that we have. So if there's an excess of CO2, wouldn't that mean that the trees, the soil, and the water have an abundance of nourishment to absorb? But they're not able to absorb it. And why is that? So that I think that's the more important question: is why isn't the soil, the trees, the waters able to absorb this carbon? And I think
Binding
it's
agent.
because of all of it binding agent. Yeah. And I think it's because of all the glyphosate we're spraying, all the heavy metals in the environment, and just the toxicity in general. And how that relates to our physiology is carbon dioxide is not a bad guy. Carbon dioxide is like carbon, we are carbon-based life forms, right? And carbon dioxide is necessary for oxygen delivery. And it is a waste gas, yes. But we really want to improve our carbon dioxide tolerance. Because when we improve our tolerance to carbon dioxide, that means that we have more of this happening. For those not able to see the video, when we have more carbon dioxide tolerance, that means there's more oxygen delivery happening in every moment. So we're actually getting the nourishment that we need, oxygen, into our cells and our tissues, our brain, our muscles, our organs, where it's actually needed the most.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you for giving that breakdown. And I think that it also really ties into one of the distinctions that we had discussed previously as well about that difference between breath work and how popular it has become compared to the ideology that you endorse around breath cultivation. And as a farmer's granddaughter, daughter, and lineage of farmers in the family, it's like there's the work and there's the cultivation. So it's like you've got to have the cultivation in order for there to be any work to be done, because if you don't properly cultivate the soil, then you're not going to get as good of yields.
Mm, I like that analogy. Yeah. When I first started my breath journey with the pranayama and the Wim Hof breath work, that was when Wim Hof just released his study around 2014, 2015, I believe. So from 2013-ish to 2016, 17, that's when breath work was just becoming a hot word, because Wim Hof has just released that study where he beat E. coli, first with his mind and then his breath. So that was when it was becoming really good. And that was the term used, breath work. And I continued to use that until maybe 2022. And how I see that word now is, okay, if we're to break the word apart, breath work. If we are associating the word work with breathing, I think that's a huge problem, because breath is automatic, it's function, it's foundation. It should be easeful, effortless, right? So when we associate the word work with breath, we auto suggest to ourselves that it's meant to be efforting and it has to be something that we have to like strive for and work on. And a lot of breath modalities now, and breath work is becoming a lot more popular now. And the most popular modalities right now are emotional release techniques, and for a good reason, right? They offer a peak experience that allow for releasing emotions and trauma stored in the body for who knows how long it's been, decades maybe. So there's a time and place for it. Although I'm not hearing so much about the cultivation piece. And if I can just offer one contemplation, is what kind of adaptations are being created? That's it. It's all about adaptation. Okay, so both have a function. Breath work, breath cultivation, they both have functions. They both serve functions. And what adaptations are they creating physiologically in the biomechanics, the biochemistry, and the neurology? So that's what I primarily want to look at. Yeah.
How would you
Where's
define
it
an
going to go with that?
adaptation?
Adaptation. That's a good question. something that's familiar. An adaptation is something that we're familiar and something that we're familiar and good at, that has been repeated and has been practiced for a long time. So, for example, an adaptation, if you play soccer, is you probably have one foot that's better than the other, right? That's more skilled than the other. So, an adaptation is something that is repeated, that is familiar, that you build a skill upon. Now, as humans and living creatures, we are highly adaptive beings, which means there can also be maladaptations,
Mhm.
right? We can also adapt to bad things, which is why we see scoliosis, which is why we see breathing dysfunction and all these things, and coffee addictions, all these things, right? These are all adaptations. It doesn't necessarily mean all adaptations are good. Some adaptations can be bad as well. And actually, it's easier to create maladaptation, a bad adaptation, than a healthy adaptation. Simple example, let's take injury, right? You only need one really intense experience for the body to adapt to it, right? Or like one really traumatic event emotionally that has your whole psyche like wrapped around it. And okay, maybe that's the way you behave to a certain degree for your whole life.
Mhm. And you say behave, and I was actually, while you were speaking of this, thinking about beliefs and how these adaptations require us leave be the way we were before then the adaptation had us have be that which we then begin to behave as.
Can you repeat that?
Belief and behavior. So the behave is the having the new behavior or the adaptation or maladaptation. And then the belief around what we then have, which then becomes part of our identity because we identify unconsciously
Mm.
with the new behavior, is then a belief, which is what paradigms and egregores and all of these entities, which are thought forms that accrue energy based on the energy we give the idea, that then becomes a belief or a behavior that then creates the identity we identify with.
And it's so subtle, right? It's like woven in, the beliefs are woven into the behaviors.
Really.
And it's like when there's some missing information in there, or misinformation or missing information, it's like, yeah, certain behaviors can really lend to beliefs that are not contributing to our highest good.
Yeah, like this whole fear of carbon. If we're afraid of the very
Mm.
thing that's going to help break up the binding agents from the oxygen that we actually need to be able to receive, then is it not creating a culture or environment internally of fear based on that which we've learned on the outside and then internalized?
Mm. Yeah. And intolerance as well. Not only to carbon dioxide, but also just intolerance to other belief systems. And it creates this form of paralysis in culture and thought forms, which the way you think is the way you move. And it's like there's no separation.
The way you think is the way you move. Yeah, because your thoughts become things based on what we bring into the moment. We have a choice to act or not act, and everything that's inside then gets externalized.
Mhm. And also the implications of thought forms, which are waveforms on the water in our bodies and outside of our bodies as well. Take, for example, Masaru Emoto's work on water, just speaking affirmations of love and even just playing good music around it changes the entire structure of the water. And if we implicate that to, okay, what is the structure of the water in our fascia and in our muscles? then that's going to dictate how well and fluidly you move versus if we're rigid or fragile.
Yeah. So going to your handle on Instagram, I forget what it is, but I'm sure people who have heard this interview are going to want to connect with you. I'd love for you to share your handle and then actually speak into what's behind it in terms of helping athletes train at higher levels to then be able to come down and, as you expressed it, perform at superhuman levels.
So my Instagram handle and the name of my business is Peak Breathing. Peak as in top of the world and breathing as in your breath. So Peak Breathing on Instagram. And this is inspired by, well, the name of my program before used to be The Impeccable Breath. And I went through all these like, oh, what should I name it? It's like, it should be that. It's gotta be perfect. All these things, and so I've come to Peak Breathing now. And to share on the background of that, well, I come from Nepal, right? And so it's really in my blood. And if we look at the Sherpas, I think they're one of the most resilient and remarkable athletes in the world because they live at such high altitudes where there's not as much oxygen in the environment. Like these Sherpas are leading trekkers to the top of the world to summit Mount Everest. And they're carrying everyone's bags, you know? And there's a lot of movies about these people and the ethics of that whole industry as well. But really, these people, because they live at such high altitudes, they have this physiological edge over so many people. And it's not because they work out really hard every day. It's because their environment is, there's a scarce amount of oxygen there, which is, okay, is that good or bad? Well, we're highly adaptive, right? So their bodies create all these adaptations to become very economical and efficient at using the oxygen that is available. So if that Sherpa is to come back down here at sea level, I guarantee you he would outrun someone who's training really hard every single day at sea level. Simply because the adaptations that they're creating, they're saturated in an environment where it's built in hard as fuck to live there, right? Like we know that, okay, people are doing cold showers, this, that, you gotta expose your body to stress. They are living in an environment where there's just not as much oxygen. And athletes, elite athletes will go really high up into altitude to specifically train because of this advantage. They'll do the exact same training at high altitudes where breathing is harder, fatigue will set in faster, and so they're creating all these adaptations much faster. So when they do come back down to sea level, they have a massive edge over competition. So elite athletes who are, worth millions of dollars call it high altitude training, but the Sherpas just call it a walk in the village. It's just like it's just that for them, right?
Right.
And so one of my top values and principles is ease, because in the culture of being an athlete, you're pushed to work so hard, and hard work is glorified and rewarded, even to the point of breakdown, right? So if there is a way where we can actually create adaptations to make you more athletic, to have you run faster, stronger, longer, without putting your body at risk, why wouldn't we do that? And athletes pay thousands of dollars, millions of dollars for this technology, hyperbaric oxygen. They'll pay thousands of dollars for a plane ticket to bring all their equipment over, to bring their trainers over. The good thing about high altitude training is you can mimic it with your breath anywhere in the world. So we can literally bring the mountain to you. All you need to know how to do is to harness the secret hidden in plain sight, which is your breath. And very few athletes are doing this right now. Like very, 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 very few athletes are doing this right now. Professional athletes.
Mm-hmm.
In the next 10 years, every single sports team will have a breath coach. And if they don't, they're going to be falling behind.
Wow. And so that being said, how do like it's become mainstream to have breath work training. But is a breath coach necessarily doing the breath work or is it about the breath cultivation? And could you make that distinction even more clear?
Yeah. So breath work to me, what I see in the space right now is breath work. I refer to it as any type of emotional release modality or hyperventilation modality. Most emotional release techniques require hyperventilation default because you have to hyperventilate. You have to hyperventilate to create the biochemical environment to have emotional release. That's the default. Okay. Breath cultivation is how can we cultivate the breath that's breathing us, your unconscious breathing, the one that's breathing you. Because 99.999% of the breaths we take in our lives, they're unconscious. We don't have a choice but to participate in it. So breath cultivation, which is what I do, we focus on cultivating the breath that's breathing us so that you don't have to think about taking a deep breath when you're stressed. You're already doing it unconsciously. So you're going to have a higher tolerance to stress. Breath work is great for acute scenarios. For example, the Wim Hof method. Let's say you want a quick reset. Okay, hyperventilate 30, 40 times. It's going to clear your emotional field. It's going to clear your mind. And you can come back to your center much quicker. Right? Or emotional release techniques. You're going to be in a room hyperventilating for an hour, which, by the way, hyperventilation I define as, let's just break the words apart, hyperventilation, a fast respiratory rate. So if you're breathing faster than your normal breathing rate, I consider that hyperventilation, just the nature of the word itself. And so the problem, or rather my concern with breath work right now is because it's becoming so popular, you can have 50 people in a room at a festival or at some event, and one person, just one person, 1 to 50 ratio, one person guiding 50 people how to breathe. Often that's a hyperventilation modality. Did any of those 50 people get screened for sleep apnea, anemia, asthma? In my experience, no, they're often not. And often these breathwork facilitators don't have an understanding of what is happening biochemically. Right? They just know that, okay, this is the pattern. It creates this result of emotional release. But what's happening physiologically is, like here we'll use an analogy or a visual. For those who are watching the video, you'll have this visual. For those who aren't, I have my hand up straight and palm facing me. So at my wrist, we'll say is my baseline carbon dioxide level. Okay, so this is your baseline carbon dioxide. Remember, neural drive to breathe is carbon dioxide. So when my carbon dioxide goes into my hand or my palm, that's going to signal my brain to breathe faster. Okay. So what happens with a hyperventilation breath work modality is you breathe faster. This is going to allow carbon dioxide goes down in your bloodstream. Every breath you take that's faster or hyperventilatory, your carbon dioxide goes down, right? we'll take Wim Hof, for example, 30, 40 hyperventilatory breaths. At the end of the 40 breaths, your carbon dioxide tolerance, or rather your carbon dioxide level, is going to be basically at your elbow, which is why people can hold for so long after they do that. Because neural drive to breathe is all the way down here. So it's going to take extra time for CO2 to come back up, 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 back to baseline, and then signal breathing. All right. So the biochemical environment needed for a peak experience and what's happening is that carbon dioxide goes down all the way here. When there's not as much carbon dioxide, there's not as much oxygen delivery happening, right? Because remember, CO2 is the neural drive to breathe. Sorry, CO2, yes. So CO2 is the neural drive to breathe, yes. And CO2 is the only thing that allows and signals oxygen delivery. So if there's not as much CO2 available, there's not as much oxygen delivery happening. And so in this environment, body will go into a stress response, a sympathetic response.
Mm-hmm.
But it's happening in a safe container where you're doing it consciously, right? So that's the magic of it. You can get into a sympathetic state in a conscious, safe space. That's the beauty of breathwork, is you can actually have these emotional releases in a container where it's completely safe to do so,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if the brain's not receiving as much oxygen, that means your reptilian brain, or rather, when the brain is not receiving as much oxygen, the neocortex does not receive oxygen, right? So most of the blood will go to the oldest part of your brain, the reptilian brain, to keep you alive and
Mm-hmm.
surviving.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what's happening. You go into a sympathetic response, your reptilian brain goes active, and you're still conscious, right? So you can actually have these emotional releases. Now, what are the adaptations being created? That's what we want to look at, okay? Because these serve a purpose. And what is the adaptation that's being created after this experience? Well, let's look at biochemically. If your carbon dioxide goes down here from the hyperventilating, your new baseline is going to be lower, right? Which means for your waking day-to-day state, you have a lower tolerance to carbon dioxide, which means you're going to be having less oxygen delivery happening. So that's biochemically. Number two, the biomechanical adaptations, meaning the muscles being used for breathing. In order to hyperventilate, or rather, it's very hard to hyperventilate when you're breathing truly deep, right? You just can't. You have to use your secondary breathing muscles to hyperventilate, which is your neck, your shoulders, and your chest. And if someone is doing 30, 40 hyperventilation, the Wim Hof method, or hyperventilating for an hour straight, and using these secondary breathing muscles, then the brain adapts to it. It becomes familiar and skilled to this motor program of neck, chest, shoulder breathing. So when they come out of that experience, they have created less breathing function.
Right.
And the concern with this is most people nowadays, I don't want to say most people, many people nowadays are already living in a sympathetic dominant fight or flight state simply because our world is so fast paced. So if we layer on top of this sympathetic driven fried nervous system more hyperventilation, it actually makes the baseline nervous system state worse. And this was me for the first 3-4 years of my practice. I did Wim Hof probably 3-4 times a week. I felt so amazing right after the practice, but looking back now, it didn't change my breathing function. It actually made it worse. So breath work can actually damage your breathing function. And this is a big piece of missing information in our culture. Even in the conscious space, this information is missing. And I don't want to say misinformation, it's missing, right? We just don't know. And I didn't know either.
I sympathize, just to use the sympathetic nervous system connection and sympathetic resonance as well, being a factor maybe within the culture of getting used to doing the breath work. And then we sympathize with the rest who are not in rest, digest, relaxation mode, but in the efforting in order to get to the breakthrough and the thrive and the push and force and that efforting that, how healthy is that?
Intensity by definition cannot be sustained. Yeah, it's intensity by definition cannot be sustained. And so I personally only practice hyperventilation modalities. I give myself a quota of like 4 a year. Last year I did 6 just because it's like whatever, whatever. But I limit myself because I know how I feel and how my breathing function feels the next day, which is even if I do one, like a 3 round of Wim Hof, the next day, my breathing will feel like it's in my neck. Actually, it'll stay there for like 2, 3 weeks. And this is likely because I'm very attuned to where my breath resides in my body, but I feel the adaptations just from that one session for 2 to 3 weeks. And if someone's doing this almost every single day, which some people are, and they feel amazing right after, it's gonna go right under the radar, right? It's like, why? Okay, I feel great right after the practice, but is my baseline state really changing? And because of the behavior that is being created, the belief that is anchored is, okay, this is actually supporting me. So it's like this subtle, it's very subtle. And that's why I didn't pick up on it for 3 years.
You had mentioned about a fried nervous system, and I think that that is one of the most under talked about or addressed factors of a culture that thrives on stress. So, if you wanted to actually unpack that more, I think it would be highly beneficial for those who have been listening to this interview with Aakrist of Peak Breathing on Instagram right now and Laura J with Peaceful Inner Warriors United. And simply saying that again because repetition is exactly the reason that I'm asking you to go back to what you had said about the fried nervous system.
Can you repeat your question?
I can't verbatim repeat it, but the question was around the ungrounded fried nervous system and how when you have elevated your breath into um, less oxygen rich zones in the body to create those maladaptions, how does that impact us in the longer term?
Yeah. Intensity by definition cannot be sustained. And I think that the notion of stress kills is not entirely accurate. Right? Stress is good for us to varying degrees. You need stress. It's like gravity, the baby goes through growing pains. It's like there's all these stressors that are actually beneficial for us. It's just excess stress kills. It's not the stress that kills, it's the excess stress that kills. And when our rate of recovery is not exceeding our rate of breakdown, that's when symptoms or disease start to present themselves. So again, when our rate of recovery is not exceeding our rate of breakdown, or put another way, when we're breaking down faster than we're recovering, that's when stress actually kills us because it's excess.
I was having a
And my
conversation.
friend said this to me once.
Oh,
My
carry
friend
on.
said this to me once. He said, there's no such thing as working out too much, only recovering too little.
Mm,
And
yeah.
what dictates recovery is, well, there's a lot of things, but primarily it's breathing function. How much oxygen is getting into your cells that have been torn apart through your exercise, right? How much nourishment can you get to the tissues that need it the most?
Yeah.
And we can work out as much as we want. It's just, are we recovering fast enough? And that's really my gauge, is how well can I recover from exercise after like any bout of intensity, right? Because that's how I can know what my threshold for stress is. And if it takes me a longer time to bounce back, then well, next time I'm more mindful. Because right? We've all been to the gym for the first time in a year and been super excited. Like, just like, yeah, I'm gonna do all the things. All the workouts. I'm gonna be in the gym for 2 hours. But then for 7 days after, we're sore. We can't move. We're just stretching the whole time. That's because there was excess stress and the body responded by going into protection mode and contracting. So for 7 days, you're stretching it out, trying to lengthen these muscles instead. Or rather, we could have just, been mindful of our adaptations and gently increased our loading day by day. And you've been back into the gym the next day and the next day instead of having to take a 7 day break.
Yeah. Wow. I was going to say that earlier today I was actually talking to my friend that clears frequencies from the body, and we were having the conversation about stress actually being the I equated it to the wagon of the settlers that were crossing the prairies, and stress becomes the wagon that is sticky and then holds all of the other heavier emotions that we then start to carry with us. And I'm hearing a parallel to what you're saying, in that if you don't discharge the stress from the body, which is the recovery you speak of, then essentially you're burdening the body or creating the wagon effect, that then you're carrying the stress and everything else that wasn't able to be released. Because I've heard that after a deer is chased by a predator, for instance, they'll actually do this little poing movement that actually is discharging the stress and the fear out of their body, so that then it's not in the system, and now they are able to actually be in the rest, relaxation, and digest kind of experience of being at presence, compared to in the sensing of the threats in the environment
Mm,
that are all around.
yeah. Can you tell me more about the wagon? I'm not familiar with that story.
Well, it actually more so came to me while Neil Anderson and I were speaking this morning. And he was saying that stress is the frequency that then brings other emotions of heavier density in with them to create layers of stories. And essentially, if you remove the frequency of stress, then the wagon, so to speak, that was supporting all of the other emotional baggage no longer has the foundation to sit on. So to
Mm,
change the one is to change the all. And if stress is that foundation, it is kind of like the wagon that carries all of it until the wagon is pulled out, and then the rest have to be recirculated and um, go to be filtered through the system.
yeah. And what if we can also strengthen the wagon and build on its capacity to handle more stress, which is exactly what the Sherpa are doing without even having to think about it, simply because they live at such high altitudes. And another note about breathwork is where do these practices come from? Where does breathwork come from? Breathwork is roughly translated now in means pranayama. Prana meaning life force, yama meaning control of, so controlling life force. Pranayama or breathwork really comes from like thousands of years ago, high up in the Himalayas, from the monasteries, right? these esoteric traditions where you needed like a year of initiation at least at a monastery to be even graced these practices. Nowadays, it's on the ground. Everybody has access to them. You can do a little quick Google search, including the person that has sleep apnea, anemia, asthma. And so these practices, where they originated from, there was a initiation process that was required to practice these things. So these people already had mind mastery, breath mastery. Plus, they were living at such high altitudes that their body was already adapted to being a healthy breather. So there was a lot of things built into the environment and the tradition that protected someone from being fried and getting even more fried.
Wow. There is such a danger to fast tracking access to that which we're not ready for, but we think we are, but our body, the vessel, is not ready for. So it's 2:34 at this moment, and I know that we had said that we would keep it to less time than we have been recording. And I also see how much value you have, and I would love to be able to hear more around what you would recommend for people with asthma or sleep apnea or any other breathing issues. But I would love to invite you to come back and have another conversation after people have digested what has been covered today, to be able to engage in the comments, ask some questions, share some perspectives, challenge what has been said if you have a different perspective. And then Aakrist and I can come back together and actually go deeper into some of what you who are watching this share. So, making this an interactive conversation that allows us to grow together and get to know one another better as we go, I think is really part of what the Peaceful Inner Warriors United initiative is designed to do, where we unite with those who have climbed higher up the mountain of consciousness, so to speak, and learned to breathe at higher levels and altitudes to be able to perform at higher levels when we do get back down to ground level.
Yeah, I can leave the viewers or takeaway from today is stop taking a deep breath. Take a steady breath. Because the moment when we say deep, we associate that with fill the lungs. But
Right.
often what happens when we try to fill the lungs is it gets into our neck and our chest and our shoulders, doesn't actually go deep by definition. So try this in your body. Take a deep breath. Whatever that means for you, whatever your interpretation of a deep breath is, take that now. And notice which spinal segment it reaches down to or up to. Is it the lower back, upper back, maybe the neck, maybe the base of your spine? Taking another deep breath. In a moment, taking a steady breath, noticing which spinal segment it reaches down to or up to now. Is it the neck, the upper back, lower back, maybe even the base of your spine? And perhaps you notice that this steady breath is actually deeper than your deep breath. It's a really simple way to slow down your biorhythm is to steady your breath.
And you had said as well about the box breathing being where people are actually disconnecting the breath's ability to reach all of the segments of the spine as well, which is creating some of those maladaptive practices of disconnect within the body.
Yeah, box breathing it's a great starting point. It's very simple, like very practical, easy to do. Although the cadence is going to differ. Most people start with a 4-4. Some people even do like an 8-8, which for one person, 8 seconds is perfect. But for another person, 8 seconds is going to create stress in the body.
Mm.
And so it really becomes about, like, I always do an assessment with my clients, assessment first. Without an assessment, I can't write you a program because I might actually be creating maladaptations for you. So it's very important to know exactly where the person is and where they are breathing to begin with, to start where you are.
Mhm.
There's a lot of breathing practices that are very generalized, which is, if you're breathing consciously, that's a great start. Like, totally do it, and if it's from your nose over your mouth, even better. But if we really want to dive deeper and start to cultivate our breath and meet ourselves where we're at, then I think there needs to be an assessment done to be tailored to that specific human being.
I love it. And if people did want to engage with you, would reaching out through Instagram be the best way for them to reach you, Aakrist?
Yeah, you can reach me on Instagram and you can send me an email at aakristdongol@gmail.com.
Okay. I will get you to send that so I can put that into this while I'm saying it. And I so appreciate all of the wisdom and insights that you've shared today, Aakrist, and really look forward to those who watch back this interview to hear what it brings up for you and what it brings out in you to be able to get curious about your own breathing practice. And then talking more about that in a future episode would be an absolute gift to us all, I do believe.
Yeah. And feel free to message me if you have any questions, hit me up. I'd love to hear from you guys. And thank you so much for having me. Super pleasure. It sounds like, we say 45 minutes, but it's like, it's so easy to go over.
It is. It is, and it's so worth it. And absolutely grateful that you made the space and the time to grace us with all that you have to offer, Aakrist, today. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.